This right here, my friend, is media manipulation, mass psychosis happening right before our very eyes. And boy, oh boy, yes, it is definitely on purpose.
The windows were smashed and 2 cars set on fire during a protest against a NATO summit being held in Montreal.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Over Opinionated with Jasmine Lane. It's kind of funny, isn't it, how the government goes and puts on mask mandates across the globe for something that they admitted themselves afterwards did not limit the risk of infection or spread whatsoever, thereby making its citizens who once would have thought it was weird to wear a balaclava to conceal your identity in the middle of July. That was my thought I had this summer, at least. Now making that something that is completely acceptable and normal to the point where we don't even question it. We don't question why these people who are inciting violence, who are inciting hatred, who are chanting death to whatever XYZ is on the mind that day, why it is that if they are so confident and proud of what they are doing that they want to hide their identity. They want to hide their accountability, because you can't really be accountable if nobody knows who you are, right? You don't risk being canceled or losing your job for bashing in the windows of a university, let's say, or lighting the Canadian flag on fire if nobody knows who you are. And that just became a normal thing for us. It almost makes you wonder if some of those measures were intentional, so that governments could have these really radical extremist things take place, not do anything about them, maybe because they actually want to have the country filled with a whole bunch of chaos and fear.
Too woke? Hey, Pierre Poilievre, it's time for you to wake up.
Owing controversy surrounding an Ottawa high school that played an Arabic language song, which has been linked to protests of the Israel-Hamas conflict. It happened during a Remembrance Day ceremony yesterday.
So that they can then come out and save the country, right? That's how typical communist regimes tend to go. And on top of that, it's just bizarre to me how the Canadian government, and in the United States as well, routinely spoon-feed us this propaganda saying there's such a major foreign interference threat. Oh, it's Russia. It's the conservatives, because they're all paid by Russia, right? But none of them are talking about the very real, that we can see, it's right in front of us, foreign interference threat that has come with the pro-Palestine movement. If you haven't done so already, hit that subscribe button so that you never miss an episode. And also like this video, that helps YouTube show it to more people. You can comment your thoughts down below. We have a lot to get into today, and we are really going to be fact-checking and debunking and calling out the insanity, the absolute psychosis that has intentionally been created by I'd like to add that our government, for whatever reason, seems to be very complacent with.
What is considered reasonable mitigation of civilian casualties? Well, it isn't warning everybody ahead of time that I'm going to go into your neighborhood. It certainly isn't calling them on their cell phones ahead of time and saying, hey, we're about to attack this area. It isn't doing drones where you bring stuff down going, please leave the area, we're about to attack this house. And yet the IDF is doing those things. I'm sorry, but there is no measurement that we can utilize with respect to how militaries engage in combat operations with a legitimate and honest attempt to mitigate civilian casualties and not come to the conclusion that at the very least the Israeli ground forces have gone above and beyond whatever those standards might be. And so at this point, what an honest media would be asking is, why do you insist on keeping women and children in combat zones? Hamas is not confused about where Israel is going to go. Why won't they move them out of the areas? Why do they keep them in those areas? Why do they insist that they stay? And another video we did a while back was we asked the question on why don't more Arab countries accept Palestinian refugees? The answer is they used to. And then Palestinian refugees sided with Saddam Hussein when he invaded Kuwait. They tried to overthrow the Jordanian government. They did help destabilize Lebanon. They've caused problems within Egypt. And so it's not that I am trying to minimize civilian casualties when they take place. but I think it's absurd to rationally look at what is going on the ground right there and then come to the conclusion that Israel's just saying, if Israel wanted to genocide Gaza, they could. And it wouldn't have taken them this long.
Also, very likely that this video is going to get demonetized. So a fun, friendly little reminder that I do have a PayPal donation link in the description of this video. If you would like to help us keep on going, I am 100% independent after retiring from mainstream media just a few months ago to pursue YouTube full time. Let's first be clear that the media is overwhelmingly calling what happened in Montreal as an anti-NATO protest. Just take a look at this, okay? Do you think this looks like an anti-NATO protest, or does this look like the same protest that our government has failed to do anything about that's been taking place in our country for over a year? I just want you to look for it. Just look at the flags and the signs. Do you see any anti-NATO stuff in there? No? And it's interesting because the media has said, oh, well, it's because there's a bunch of NATO people who were meeting in Montreal to discuss NATO things. Okay, cool. What does NATO have to do with the Palestinian conflict? It actually, factually, has no active role in the Israel-Palestine conflict. So it's really bizarre that there just so happens to be a NATO meeting taking place in Montreal, and suddenly the media is now trying to manipulate the public narrative. And instead of saying pro-Palestine, because then that would make the pro-Palestine events taking place look bad, because they are, and the media doesn't want to get canceled by them. So then they instead say, oh, the reason why cars were lit on fire, 3 people were arrested, windows were smashed, Montreal is burning, is because of NATO. Yeah, no, actually, NATO has nothing to do with this. Just a happy coincidence that there just so happen to be people from NATO in the city of Montreal, and that they are very intentionally trying to disrupt the public view of the situation and think that, no way, pro-Palestine is good. They're marching to end genocide.
People talk about what's happening in Gaza and they say, you know, it's genocide, it's this, it's that. And then other people say, well, look at the civilian to combatant death ratio. Actually, this is the most humane operation in history. What do you make of all of that?
I think the people that are calling it genocide are either being intentionally dishonest or don't know what the word genocide means.
They're marching to end the occupation. Because if you go and look at history, which all of us have access to, 1996, after a 6-day war, Israel captured Gaza from Egypt, and they were under Israel military administration until 2005. After 2005, Israel withdrew from Gaza, aka, nope, not occupying it anymore. In fact, Israel has not had any direct settlements or presence in Gaza since 2005. So whose occupation are they upset about? Because it certainly isn't Israel's. And I haven't heard them say anything about Hamas or Iran being the ones who have occupied Gaza and made life very difficult for their people. In fact, in 2007, Hamas seized control of Gaza after a rather violent situation occurred with the Palestinian Authority. And since 2007, Gaza has been occupied by Hamas and Iran, who are the ones behind Hamas. You have a lot of people saying, oh, well, Israelis, they're so cruel to Palestinians, they're so cruel to Gazans. Well, actually, as of 2023, around 20,000 Gazans had permits to work in Israel, where they could freely go back and forth because they could make more money in Israel, and Israelis were hiring Gazans to allow them to make more money and live a better life. Doesn't sound like much of an occupation to me.
Hamas knew when they went into Israel that they weren't going to overthrow Israel. When they took hostages, they knew that the IDF was coming for them. And yet they did both, right? So they knew they couldn't defeat the IDF militarily. And they knew getting hostages would force the IDF to come after them in a big way. So why'd they do that? And how did they know that Western academia and media would almost instantly be on their side? And the reason why is because a lot of these organizations have invested very, very heavily within America academia. I don't know the numbers for European academia, but I'm assuming it's probably significant. At the same token, they understood that the way that you manipulate Western media and Western sensibility is civilian casualties. Where you benefit strategically from civilian casualties, you have the perfect environment to maximize that in a way that no other military can mitigate other than giving up. That's not how it's going to be reported by Hamas to CNN, who will dutifully report X number of children killed on the objective.
There's a number of schools of thought here, but I would say arguably the biggest one has been the fact that our government and our media has certainly been lying to us about this. And why would they be lying to us about this? How was Hamas able to infiltrate primarily university students who are already programmed to respecting authority and wanting to do good and look good, right? So you don't really think for yourself a whole lot. Go with the flow and do what everybody else is doing. You're a sheep in the herd. You're not a lion yet because you're still a kid and you're figuring your life out and you want to be liked by everybody. So it's very easy to get swept into these ideologies, which we often see targeting younger people. And as for the adults that get involved, well, my speculation on them is that most of them are probably people who have often felt ostracized, maybe didn't have very many friends, never really felt important, and they're finally in something that makes them feel important and like they're doing good, and then you're just spoon-fed that propaganda and you really believe it. Now, don't get me wrong, there have certainly been some questionable things that the Israeli government has done. There's definitely vitriol. There's definitely a deep hatred that goes back generations amongst a lot of these people. But as a whole, the things that are happening really don't add up. And what has been the response of our leaders in regard to all of this? This is probably easier. I'm just going to share this TikTok video that I made of my thoughts after seeing Justin Trudeau's tweet. And then we'll get into how beautiful Pierre Poilievre's was. You know, it's pretty crazy how Justin Trudeau regularly talks about how Pierre Poilievre is just not here for Canadians, and the Liberal Party really is. When Pierre Poilievre was live tweeting as this was happening in Montreal and Justin Trudeau was exchanging friendship bracelets with 16-year-olds at a Taylor Swift concert. But you know what? He's right. Yep, this is not acceptable, needs to be condemned, and there should be consequences. I'm just really wondering when that's all going to happen, because the leader of the opposition has already been doing press conferences condemning this behavior for months, over a year, actually. And, Trudeau, I remember the last time you really wanted to condemn the violence and intimidation. It didn't take you over a year to freeze bank accounts and send the horses on all of the peaceful protesters at Parliament Hill. So I'm just wondering, you say you want them to be held accountable. So when are you, the leader of our country, going to do that? It's just a little bizarre to me that Charlotte Cates, the woman behind the pro-Hamas movement here in Canada, is still living in Vancouver, even after receiving an award from the Iranian government. Still living here, still trucking on, still getting all kinds of donations, even though her husband was actually removed from Germany, where he previously lived, due to his violence. And she was with him. And then they just came back to Canada, and he got a nice little Canadian citizenship, even though he was deported from another country due to this rhetoric. And after Pierre Poilievre had already condemned all of this stuff way before Justin Trudeau apparently cared about it, he also replied in the most epic way ever, I'd like to add, to Justin Trudeau's status, where he wrote, "You act surprised. We are reaping what you sowed. This is what happens when a prime minister spends 9 years pushing toxic, woke identity politics, dividing and subdividing our people by race, gender, vaccine status, religion, region, age, wealth, etc. On top of driving people apart, you systematically break what used to bring us together, saying Canada is a post-national state with no core identity," which, yes, he has said. "You erased our veterans and military, the famous five, and even Terry Fox from our passports to replace them with meaningless squirrels, snowflakes, and a drawing of yourself swimming as a boy." You opened the borders to terrorists and lawbreakers and called anyone who questioned it racist. You send out your MPs to say one thing in a mosque and the opposite in a synagogue, one thing in Mandir and the opposite in Gurdwara. You have made Canada a playground for foreign interference. You allowed Iran's IRGC terrorists to legally operate here for 4 years after they murdered 55 of our citizens in a major unprovoked attack. You passed laws that released rampant offenders from prison within hours of their 80th arrest. And what is the result? Assassinations on Canadian soil, firebombings of synagogues, extremist violence against Mandirs and Gurdwaras, over 100 churches burned or vandalized with barely any condemnation from you, all for a total of an increase of 251% more hate crime. My biggest fear is something that I've said many times before. The way that the Trudeau Liberal government and the woke ideology in Western society has completely corrupted and brainwashed the minds of our youth is something that will take many years to overcome, if at all. And on top of that, unless some major changes to our legal system are made, which take lots of time to actually push through in Parliament, or mass deportations happen, which again, do take a long time in most cases. And let's not forget that all of these people who are inciting all of this rhetoric have been hiding their faces, so you don't even know who they are. How do you come to a point where you could even deport them when our government has made it normal to conceal your identity? And if there's this many people confidently on the streets behaving in such an erratic, immature, extremist way, imagine how many more there are that are currently being indoctrinized or maybe didn't come out on this night in particular, who are just lying in wait. How do you get yourself out of this situation? They're already here. That's it for today's episode of Over Opinionated with Jasmine Lane. Definitely comment down below. I know this is a very hot topic at the moment. Like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I will talk to you tomorrow.